So let me paint a picture I've seen played out more than once. A couple in their 60s or 70s decides to leave the family home. They're ready for something easier. They picture slow mornings and less cleaning and more free time for what they love, and it feels like the right move. But fast forward a few months after moving. The artwork they loved is packed away still because there's no space on the walls. The dining table is too small for everyone. The guest room is gone, and the holidays come, and the kids come over, and the grandkids want to stay, and suddenly there's nowhere for life to happen the way it used to. That smaller home that was supposed to feel, freeing and starts to feel very limiting. That's what I call the downsizing trap. And the surprising part to this, it doesn't happen because people made a bad decision. It happens because they missed something no one told them to think about. Most people think downsizing is simple. It's the obvious: less stuff, less space, less stress. But downsizing isn't just about having less. It's about whether the space still fits your life. And when that piece gets missed, that's when everything starts to really feel off. And in this video, let's talk about the part no one really lays out clearly: the truth about downsizing and decluttering, not just the highlight reel, but the full picture. And let's start with the good, because there is definitely a good side to all of this. When downsizing and decluttering are done well, life can actually feel lighter. I've seen people go from managing a home full of things to finally feeling like they're back in control again. And along with that feeling comes less cleaning, less maintenance, and less mental load. And I'm going to get into the mental load more in a bit. And more importantly, there's more time. And as I mentioned, more freedom, more clarity around what actually matters. And this is the key. There's also something surprising that happens. You begin to realize how little you actually need. Things you thought were important don't carry the same weight anymore. And for some people, there's a moment where they stop and think, why didn't I do this sooner? That may sound right now for you a distant dream, but trust me, it's very true. But that's not the that's only one side of the story, because then comes the part most people don't expect, and that's the emotional side to this entire process. This is where downsizing and decluttering stop being practical and really start becoming very personal. And going through your things isn't just simply organizing, it's decision making, constant decision making, and every decision carries weight for you. So you're standing there holding something and asking yourself questions you didn't expect. What if I need this someday? Why is this so hard to let go of? Am I making the right decision? And the emotions don't show up in a neat, predictable way. No, one moment you feel clear and focused, the next you feel overwhelmed. And then maybe there's a bit of peace followed by doubt again. There's stress, uncertainty, even sadness at times. And it can be a real roller coaster of emotion. But there can also be clarity and relief, and that emotional roller coaster is completely normal. It's all part of the process. But when people don't expect it, they try to push through it, tough it out, grin and bear it type response. And then they try to rush it. They tell themselves they just need to get it done. And that's when mistakes start to happen. One of the biggest mistakes is trying to do everything at once. People look at the entire house and feel like they need to deal with it all immediately. Big mistake. It becomes overwhelming very quickly. The better approach is much simpler. And if it doesn't feel that way at first, one drawer, one shelf, one space at a time. That's how you build momentum. I always say start small, much like starting, let's say, new exercise program. You don't go and run a 10K race. You build up to it, and with learn, you're using a run to learn program. The same goes with decluttering. Don't start with the hardest, most cluttered part of your house, which often is the basement or garage. This is like starting with the 10K run first, then going back and doing the short runs after. Another mistake is trying to do it alone. This process is bigger than most people expect. Not just physically, but emotionally too. And I've seen it over and over again. The moment someone brings in help, whether it's a family, friends, or even paid support, everything changes. it becomes lighter, it becomes much more manageable, and sometimes it even becomes meaningful. This can be the time to unburden yourself with keeping things because you feel you should. You know, that should is often. I kept stuff from my mom's home just for that reason. By keeping these things, I felt I was keeping her memory alive. I was honoring her being still around, except the stuff I was keeping was tucked away at the back of my buffet cabinet or packed away in a box in my basement. Neither way was keeping her memory alive. It kept me feeling guilty if I thought of getting rid of those things that I wasn't at all enjoying at all. And then there's a mistake that ties directly back to the opening story that I told you. People bring too much with them. I fell into this mistake myself. Even after decluttering, even after making decisions, people still hold on to more than their new space can realistically handle. So instead of creating freedom, they actually create more friction. Closets don't work, rooms feel tight. I had so much stuff in our new basement that it had to go into the bathroom, and it was overflowing by the end of the day, and we ended up not being able to turn off the light because we couldn't reach the light switch. And the other problem is space never quite functions the way you imagined it would. I thought I had far more storage than I did. And over time, that feeling really builds within us. There's also the other side of this that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's waiting too long. You know, I see people who they know they want a simpler life, but they delay the decision. Years go by even, and the house becomes harder to maintain. The amount of stuff becomes more overwhelming, and the process becomes heavier than it needs to be. And when waiting to take action too long, the decision becomes someone else's decision often, like an adult child's, and the choices become far more limited. The independence you cherish so much is gone due to illness or mobility or memory issues. And when you think about it, that's not actually the outcome you want. I can't imagine anyone wishing for this type of scenario. And then there's one more piece that's easy to overlook: continuing to accumulate stuff. Because downsizing isn't just about letting go once, it's about changing your relationship with the things you bring into your life moving forward. If that part doesn't shift, the clutter just actually comes back, just in a smaller space, and the smaller space amplifies that problem. And now there are also a couple of misconceptions that trip people up. The first is that decluttering is just stressful and overwhelming. And yes, there's an element of that for sure, but that's not the whole story. When you approach it the right way, it actually becomes easier over time. You build what I like to think as a decluttering muscle. Decision making gets easier. Letting go becomes less emotional and guilt ridden, or asking the what if someone could use this type questions. And the process becomes more manageable. And again, it's like building up your physical fitness to run that 10K. The first time would likely feel really challenging, maybe even hard. Keep practicing and the 10K becomes easier. Or like cooking a new recipe. It's hard and maybe complicated at first. Do it a couple times and the recipe actually feels easier. Here's the second misconception, is that downsizing is only for minimalists. It's not. This isn't about living with nothing. It's about living with what actually supports your life. There's a big difference between those two things. Having stuff tucked away in closets or cupboards and keeping it because someone might use it, or keeping it for your kids or grandkids someday, is not benefiting you or them. And by the way, your kids will more likely than not want the stuff. So what actually works? If you want downsizing to feel right, not just on paper, but in your day-to-day life, there are a few things that make a real difference. Start small. I've mentioned this already. Not because it's easier, but because it works. Small wins builds momentum, and momentum is what keeps you moving forward. Have a simple system: a keep, a donate, and a let go. It sounds basic, but it helps you make clearer, more intentional decisions. Acknowledge the emotional side. Letting go can be difficult, and that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means that you're simply human. And here's something I always remind people: the memories aren't in the items, they're in you. and keep the key things that remind you of that loved one. Maybe it's one thing from their collection. Maybe it's 2 or 3 items that you love and you use or sit out to remind you of your loved one. You don't need an entire tea service to remember your grandmother. Maybe using the sugar bowl in a different use is a way to keep that person's memory alive. So I would offer focus on what you're gaining: more clarity, more freedom, more space, and not just physically, but mentally too. Because this process isn't just about your home, it's about your headspace too. Your headspace is very precious property to nurture and really treat well. And finally, before you downsize, ask yourself one simple question: what does my life actually need in this stage? Not just less space, but the right space. Do you host family? Do the grandkids stay over? Do you need flexibility, storage, or quiet areas? Because if your home can't support the way you actually live, it won't feel right, no matter how efficient or simplified it is. And that's exactly how people end up in the downsizing trap. Downsizing isn't the problem. Decluttering isn't the problem. It's how you do that makes the difference. Done well, it can be one of the most freeing decisions you ever make. Done too quickly or without enough thought, it can start to feel like a compromise. So before you give up space, make sure you're not giving up the parts of your life that matter most to you, because the goal isn't to live with less, it's actually to live better.